Welcome to CR275 Week 2 fly through on our PowerPoint. So let's have a look at what we're doing today. We're going to look at the whole concept of a fair test, and there's some things we're going to do in class. I think videos that we're going to watch and some online simulations that we can do for both the on-campus and online. Then we're going to dive in a little bit. What makes science science? How is it different to other forms of knowledge? What's its model of inquiry? So we're looking at what we call scientific method. And then how do we then do the science? How is it written up? And there's a certain particular genre of a scientific report that we're going to. And then we're going to discuss science teaching and technology teaching and that universal thing called project-based learning, which is a natural fit for both of these areas. So that's where we're heading today. Going to review first up, how did we go with those things? And this is a good precursor for understanding variables, controlling variables, and the scientific method. So that's where that starts, and that's what we get diving into initially. Here we have some interesting information and examples of what's called an independent and a dependent and a controlled variable. This is an experiment about, what light colours influence the growth of plants. So the thing that we are changing is the different sorts of light colour. And it's called the independent variable. Now, the outcome of doing that depends on the measurable variable, the height of the plant. So, what we do here will depend what happens here. And what do we need to keep the same? In other words, are we going to use different plants for these tests, or are we going to use the same plant? Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair, would it? If we use different plants. So the thing that you want to change is called the independent variable. The thing that you are going to measure or observe is called the dependent variable. The thing that you want to keep controlling and tightly the same are all the other things. The same temperature, conditions, if it's an outside experiment, wind, same type of object, same size of object, etc. Now, I've got some great website and video examples that unpack that, but that's critical to understand for you and for your students when you're talking about the scientific method. And there's some questions here. And it links nicely with this really lovely science word called hypothesis. Now, hypothesis is a statement of intent, a statement of, not a guess, but it's a statement of what you think will happen. And there's two parts to it. Different light colours do not influence plant growth. Now, notice that I'm choosing those words because I'm using the independent and dependent variables. So a hypothesis statement can extends beyond this, but it must contain what is the independent variable going to influence the dependent variable, and in the middle is the effect or a qualifier. In other words, different lights do not influence this. You might say different light colours do, or you might be more precise, which is the one below, and say green light will increase the growth of plants. So you're going to actually say, here is a particular type of light, and what it will do is there. So we're going to test all different lights, but green light is that. So this is your guess, your scientific statement about what you think will happen. And it must be a precise statement. Whereas the top one is probably it could be testable. It's not as precise as something in the bottom. Both are valid statements, but it's not an opinion, and it's also, you can test it. Okay, I can test this. It's not a vague statement, it's a testable one. Now, this is an online simulation, so I'll get you to do online and in class, that looks at simulations about how to design a scientific test. One's biology, one's a sort of physics one. And you can control your variables. What do you keep the same? What do you make different? What's the dependent? What's the independent variable? Are all examined in these information. And it comes down to something I haven't used before, but I saw this and I said, this is great. Cows move softly. Now, cows do move softly most of the time. But cows change only one thing. Independent variable, measure something, dependent variable, and keep everything else the same. MCS. Change only one thing, measure it, and keep everything else the same. So, for example, the concept for children might get used to is that if I change two things and I've got this outcome, which one made the difference? The answer is you don't know. So you change one thing and see if it makes a difference, and then you change the next thing and see if it makes a difference. So you only change one thing and you'll get an outcome which you can actually then conclude. Here's a video about that. And I'm going to get you next thing to look at fair test 1, 2 and 3 and tell me about it. So what I've had here, it's on the website, sorry, Moodle site, and it's just cut off. Excuse me, won't go, it's creep like this. So here's the situation. You could do in class, equal the height of a person is equal to their arm span. Is that a valid hypothesis? Is there an independent, dependent variable and a qualifier in the middle? Is a scientific test, this is what they do. Is this valid? How could you improve that? So that's test 1. Test 2, similarly, caffeine increases exam performance. Have you ever tried that? And here's how they're going to, is it valid as a hypothesis statement? Here's a scientific test that they're going to do, and is it valid? Why not? And how could you improve that? The next one is here, the larger the wheel size, the more differently it will roll. Is it a valid hypothesis? If you think it is, yes. If you think something could be better, then write a better one. And here's their test. Is that valid? Are they controlling their errors? Are they cow mooing softly on this one? So the scientific method, we go through, there's some things that are and aren't. In other words, it's testable, it's measurable, and it's observable. Now, if it's not science. So, God exists. Is that science? Is that a science question? No, it's not. Not science because it's not testable or measurable. It's the basis of faith. You might say, I can see God in action. Here you go. I will pray and this will happen. There's some elements there. You could conclude. Is it repeatable? Can someone else do the same thing? Well, maybe, maybe not. Is time in nature is good for the soul? No, it's not. Good for the soul. What the heck does that mean? It's not measurable. And how do you test that between people? Or how can you get the variables controlled? Time in nature lowers blood pressure. Yes, you can. It's measurable. And you can do samples and so on. COVID vac causes changes to your DNA. That's what I've heard that one around. I don't know if you've got some of these conspiracy theories going around. Google that, see if that's true. And is it scientific? Can you test that? Can you measure that? Can you observe that? Answer is yes, you can. Science can answer that question. Control, not just opinion. Control your variables and so on, repeatable. So that makes it the science. Here's a website explanation and a video explanation just to consolidate your learning there. I pose this question, science the only form of knowledge? Well, it seems to be the king sort of knowledge at the moment, the currency of the age now, science and technology. But is that the only form of knowledge? Now, if you study social science, you say, no, absolutely not. But what about faith? I reckon that's a form of knowledge. What about history? That's not science, but it's still a form of knowledge. And so on. Pose that question because let's keep that in mind. Scientific reports, that's how we write about what we do. It's a genre of writing. It's designed to reflect the scientific method, that being testable, controllable, and repeatable. And it has standard sections over here. Starting with what's the question, what's the hypothesis, and so on. There's a few variances in terms of the genre, the style and format of that genre, but we'll stick pretty closely to those. One thing that we will include in here is an introduction, which examines what's the science behind here. But here's a website and a video which will unpack that more fulsomely. And then we're going to go into teaching science. I'll have to work on my animations there, but choose a content strand, link it with a real question, I recommend. In other words, or even do flip 1 and 2 around, but you actually got the content strand in mind when you ask this question. But in terms of the student view, you're asking an intriguing question perhaps, or real life context. From the planning view, you've got to start, are we going to be teaching biology this term? And then choose an inquiry pedagogy, which reflects the scientific inquiry. Questioning, predicting, planning, processing, analysing, etc., which we talked just before, and then design a sequence of lessons. Top tips, make it fun, make it relevant, make it hands-on, and get the students engaged. So the teaching some great videos here and a website that talks about real-life teacher experiences. This is how I've done it, and they work. This is what they've done that's really engaged the learning. So had that to back up some of the things we asserted before. Now, STEM is really combining technology here. And what I've tried to illustrate here is the process and production skills of technology and the science inquiry skills of technology are your overlap points. That you might have. Now, you might have some overlap here in terms of, food and fibre might relate to your biological sciences and the food specialisation, for example. Materials and technology might relate to some of your physical and chemistry ones. Engineering might be likewise. But so there's some overlaps. But the process I'm illustrating here, it combines those two things. It's about inquiry, it's about testing and using perhaps scientific principles. Sometimes it's answering a problem or answering a question that's posed. It can be an extended program project. It could be 1 or 2 lessons perhaps, but it lends itself to this PBL, which is project-based learning. Fortunately, there's no STEM curriculum in the Australian curriculum, so it's about you as a teacher integrating those things together and coming up with a common topic or a common inquiry or a common project that the students might do. So I say PBL is a natural fit. So the last activity I'm going to get you to do, maybe for homework type activity over the next week, is to have a look at this PBL, project-based learning. So I've got a worksheet here which has got some hyperlinks and so on, and some activities you can do on that. It's a couple of pages long, and includes all those things. To access it, click on that icon there and it'll open up the file, and you can complete that file. To do that, so finishing off to talk about how can we integrate these things here. And I'm suggesting something like PBL is a great integrative tool for science and technology. Where do we go? Next week, we're going to the lab over here. So we're at week 3. We're going over to the microscope lab. We're going to look at plant and animal cells, have a bit of a play. Safety first. You are must wear closed-in shoes. I physically cannot allow you to enter the lab unless you have closed-in shoes. And also, if we're doing spilling and things might occur, you'll get lab coats and likewise most of the time and safety glasses. But we also should have a top covering clothing because it's winter. I don't think that's going to be a problem. So no thongs, no t-shirts or singlets. Thanks. I mean, no thongs and singlets. T-shirts will be okay. So look forward to seeing you across this week, and look forward to seeing you in lab next week.